Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
Cruising your way next, Off 90. We take a tour of a ghost town. Sometimes dredging something up can be a good thing. A magazine about pets. And an artist who combines anatomy and landscapes. These stories and more are coming up on your next stop, Off 90. Hi, I'm Barbara Keith. Thanks for joining me on this trip, Off 90. Present-day Forestville is described as a ghost town, but it wasn't always that way. In the 1850s, Forestville was a bustling town of settlers, farmers, and merchants. Come along on a tour of historic Forestville with a twist. Today's tour is all about the women of Forestville. Come see what life was like for a small-town woman in colonial Minnesota.
The women of Forestville are many, many different people, starting from way back in the Native American times when the white settlers did not live here. There were women that lived here. This was their home. This is where they raised their families. Women were viewed as the head of the family and held much power and were valued and listened to. They were builders, warriors, farmers, and craftswomen. Because women's activities were central to the community's welfare, they also held important political, social, and economic power. And then when the settlers came, there were many, many interesting women that came in the settler families as well. Of course, the family we know the most about is the Meehan family. But we also know about their hired help and some of their neighbors that lived in this area too. My name is Paula Rusink and I'm the site supervisor at Historic Forestville. We're going to introduce one of our first residents here in the home. That would have been Felix's wife, Eliza Jane Foster Meehan. Eliza Jane was sister to Robert Foster. Felix Meehan and Robert Foster went into partnership in the store. Eliza's brother Robert came first. Robert married his wife Elizabeth Renslow Foster in 1854. Elizabeth was 16 when she married Robert, who was 33. She was the daughter of other settlers in the area. Elizabeth died in 1892 at the age of 54. She had given birth to 10 children. The Fosters had left Forestville and relocated to a farm closer to Spring Valley eventually. How do you think Elizabeth felt marrying a man 17 years older than she was? You know, actually that was quite common back then. That was not out of the ordinary at all. Yep, that she had a home of her own, somebody that could support her. So, you know, she probably didn't think anything of it. For several years, I've wanted to focus a tour on just the women. When we tell the general story of Forestville, generally it's just the men that founded the town. And we just don't put a lot into the women that came with them. So it's here I'd like to introduce you to one of the subsequent hired girls, and her name was Mary Turbeast.
Mary Turbeast Dotzenrod Holzlander was born in 1875 to John Henry and Anna Turbeast at the age of 17. She married Ed Dotzenrod. This marriage ended in divorce in 1896 after the birth of two daughters, Ethel and Esther. Mary eventually moved to Sioux Falls, South Dakota area and married Charles Holzlander in 1913 at the age of 37. She passed away in 1919 when she was 43 during an influenza outbreak. Her occupation in her obituary was listed as server.
Why would a very religious woman in 1899 get a divorce? There had to be something awfully bad about that marriage for a woman to get a divorce. We know that originally she left her children with her parents, but they couldn't care for them. So her children went to live with her aunt and uncle in Elton, Iowa. And so she eventually, at the end of the year in December 15th, she cashed out with $116.80, and she moved back home. We know that eventually she moved closer to her daughters. That's how she ended up over in Sioux City. So this brings us to our next woman of Forestville, and that would be Martha Ellen Healy Meehan, or Meehan Healy. She is one of the daughters of Felix. She's the youngest daughter of Felix here in the household.
Martha Ellen Meehan Healy was born in 1861 in Forestville, Minnesota, the youngest child of Felix and Eliza Jane Meehan. Martha married John T. Healy in 1893 at the age of 32. Martha attended Forestville schools and then the St. Mary's Institute in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, where she graduated in 1881 at the age of 20. Martha was a school teacher and landowner before she was married and continued to own land in her own name after marriage. Martha died in 1935 in Ramsey County at the age of 74 and is buried at St. Licurie's Cemetery in the Carmona Township.
But one of the reasons Martha's one of our favorite characters, because as modern women, she seemed quite independent. She didn't marry until she was 32 years old. Rumor has it she was the first woman in Fillmore County to receive a college education. So Martha taught for a good many years, and she also bought up land. Remember, she and Thomas, her brother, were very close, and they often spoke of political things in their letters to one another, and also she realized the benefit of land ownership, just like her brother did. Martha was a very busy woman after she was married because John often worked away from home. And so she was running the farm as well as running her household. So that kept her very busy. John died in 1908 of bladder cancer. It didn't take Martha long before she had an auction sale. The 1918 plat map still shows Martha Meehan as the owner of 160 acres north of Forestville. Since it isn't listed as Martha Healy, it's listed as Martha Meehan. We speculate that this is land that she may have owned before she married John. Of course, we mentioned a few men as well because we couldn't have history without both. But I wanted a tour that just gave a highlight about the women that lived in this town. There's so many interesting women that lived here.
The city of Albert Lea has been going through several renovations recently. One of the latest is the dredging project happening on beautiful Fountain Lake. Learn how the Shell Rock River Watershed District started this process and how it's actually done. Climb aboard as we see workers reduce sediment and lighten the phosphorus load in this Fountain Lake restoration project.
Well, right now, Fountain Lake is on the MPCA, or Minnesota Pollution Control Agency's impaired waters list. And one of the reasons for that is the phosphorus and what we call turbidity, and that's because of the algal growth within the lake. This project has been talked about in Freeborn County in the city of Albert Lea for probably 30 years. Well, Fountain Lake has been dredged twice before, once in the 1930s and then again in the 60s. So when they were doing that, there were certain parts of the lake where they didn't dredge. And so that's kind of where we're picking up from now.
We're here at the Fountain Lake Restoration Project. We're dredging hydraulically sediment from Fountain Lake and removing material from the bottom. We are on the Dredgevik Burr. We're in the cab right now, but out in front of us we have a 26-foot ladder, and that ladder has a cutter head on the bottom of it. And at the back side of that cutter head, there's suction power Along with that, cutter head spins and agitates the material, and material is then sucked through the pipe. And that material is then routed through our pipeline system.
We got 2 pumps on the dredge, and then at the City of Albert Lea landfill, we have another booster pump that helps it push the sediment to here. And we're traveling about 4 miles through a 14-inch pipe with that sediment. The watershed district, one of our biggest issues is water quality. So when we do our sampling of Fountain Lake, one of the big things we see is internal phosphorus load, which is what the algae feeds off of and creates a green lake. On any given year, between 40 and 80% of our phosphorus load comes from the lake bottom. So it was important for us to remove that rich phosphorus-laden sediment at the bottom of the lake and remove that to help reduce that phosphorus load. That should help reduce the algae. Now, it probably won't entirely eliminate it, but it should greatly extend the longevity of the clear water state. We're looking at creating better fish habitat, deeper overwintering holes for the fish. Fountain Lake has 2 aeration systems on it, and that's one of the areas where we're looking at dredging deeper to create more habitat for those fish species through the wintertime. This pond behind us is the new home for the bottom of Fountain Lake. So this is all the material that's being dredged out of Edgewater Bay right now is being placed into this confined disposal facility. And this is where we allow the sediment to basically settle out of the water, and then we return the water back into Bancroft Creek and then send it back to Fountain Lake. Contract 1 would be the entire Edgewater Bay. We have also signed a second contract that would include the main bay and Danes Bay on Fountain Lake. Those areas will be dredged in 2020 and 2021. Behind us, you will see cells 2 and 3 being constructed, and that's where the future home of the main bay and Danes Bay will be.
Wes is digging, and he's got a swath 200 feet wide. So we have thrusters on the front. He will lower the cutter head to the design elevation that we plan on cutting to and thrust back and forth. Once he works his way down to that design elevation, everything behind him has been cleaned, essentially, and we'll continue to press forward. All that yellow on the screen represents about 5 feet of face that we need to remove. And then you progress up the blues to the lighter blues and to the greens. We're looking to target that nice light green color. On average, you got about 10% to 15% solids to water ratio. So there's a lot of water being used in the transport of dredged material.
It took us 3 years to get all of our permits from the DNR to dredge. And so yeah, now everybody's sort of following our method and looking at trying to get their areas dredged. I'm from this area, I was born in this area. I know my kids fish the lake quite often, and I want to, and I believe the district will be able to leave a legacy for future generations. Improving water quality here in Freeborn County within the Shell Rock River Watershed District is very satisfying for me, and I love what I do.
The Wagga Scene is a Rochester-based magazine about, you guessed it, pets. We talked to editor Ellington Starks, who feels that the Wagga Scene combines 2 of her passions, storytelling and pet ownership. The mission of the Wagga Scene is to help owners better understand, care for, and live with their pets.
I had become involved in dog rescue, specifically Springer Spaniel rescue, and I was seeing just a kind of a need for people to be able to share their stories, their love affair with their animals and their pets, and also some education about pets. I am Ellington Starks, the editor and publisher of the Wagga Scene. And so it was just a response to my love and kind of a marriage of my love of writing and editing and animals and animal rescue and pet ownership. So I partner with our designer, who's Kate Brew, and our photographer and general manager, I would say, is Kelvin Andow. And also Ann Indikowitz, she's in sales, and she sells the ads and makes it all happen financially. So this is a fantastic team. There's no way I did this alone. A lot of times we have writers, our freelancers will pitch stories to us, and we've printed a lot of those. And sometimes people will submit essays or ideas that we'll run with. Sometimes our readers will submit stories of their own pets, their own experiences. And then a lot of times I'm just keeping an ear to the ground about interesting animal stories that are happening in our region. So we are funded 100% by advertising. So we're so grateful for our advertisers who've come on board and will purchase an ad in the Wagga Scene, and that helps us pay for our printing costs and our freelance writer costs. It's quarterly, so it's pretty seasonal. It follows the seasons. We label the covers spring, summer, fall, and winter. We distribute it through vet offices, waiting rooms, coffee shops, groomers, anyone who advertises with us, and anyone who'll accept it in their spot.
Hello. How are you? Hi. Good. How are you?
We are a grassroots distribution system, so our staff is the distributors. So we pick up boxes from the printer when they come off the press, and we drive around and get them out there.
There you go. Thank you.
The Wagga Scene is a passion project of mine. And a lot of people ask me when I started my full-time job, oh, are you going to give up the Wagga Scene? Are you going to give up the rescue work that you do? No, and I actually even said that in my interview. I'm not willing to compromise my love of publishing these stories. You know, I stay up late hours editing and assigning stories and speaking with writers and subjects, and it's a labor of love. I always get a better return than the work I put into it. I had a great experience a couple months ago where a woman came up to me and said to me, "The Wagga Scene changed my life," and told me a story about how she read an article about a horse rescue that we had done a story on, and she volunteered with that rescue. She used the story to make contact with the rescue, became a volunteer with them, and it completely changed the outlook on her life, that weekly volunteering she began. And it still gives me chills. It gives me chills today to talk about, to know that because we published a story and because we shared someone else's passion, horse rescue, it changed another person's life. It affected someone else in that way. That is why I do the Wagga Scene.
Bria Gilchrist is very interested in landscapes and the human anatomy. Bria is an artist living in Rochester who enjoys mixing both subjects together in her work. To some, renderings of the human body can be repulsive. Bria hopes to change that perspective by branding her creations with her unique vision.
I've just always liked the aspect and the process of creating. It kind of is a way to remove myself from day-to-day life. It's being able to create my own visual perspective, whether it's a landscape or an object or now this more in-depth anatomy. It just kind of lets myself remove away, and I always enjoyed it because I was able to make something look similar to what I saw in the real life and just kind of challenging myself there. I'm Bria Gilchrist and I'm an artist. I just really clearly enjoy anatomy. When I was at the University of North Dakota in Grand Forks, where I went to get my degree, and we got to a certain level in my courses that you were taking live model classes and that you were just sketching, going back with charcoal, and getting the body and the form down, and kind of just wanted to literally learn more. I initially started with architecture and landscape, and so I kind of liked the blueprint aspect of those compositions, and then it got more honed in on the human body composition and blueprint. And so I literally delved deeper and took an anatomy course at that university, and I just loved it. I like how it's applicable to everyone. I want to make it visual to any viewer that you are looking at something that's a human structure. Whether it's a different perspective of that structure or if it's enveloped in a landscape that I also bring into the composition, I just want someone to be able to recognize, like, hey, there's a ribcage there, or oh, there's a human heart. Sometimes I just do them plain as you can see them, like even in an anatomy book. But even when I do those renderings of those subjects, whether it's like a human heart, I want it to make it more exciting than just looking it up in like a instructional manual or what you would normally see when you're studying anatomy. I want to make it more approachable, not people that usually when you're looking at anatomy, it's whether in a hospital setting or it's when you're studying for a hospital setting potentially. With technology advancing, we're able to see more clear-cut perspectives of multiple layers of the human anatomy. So I use those a lot for my own reference imagery when I'm working on a piece. And just even over the last 4 years being outside of school, you get these new updated perspectives from hospitals diving deeper into the human body, and it just kind of sparks another canvas, another painting. So until that really dies out, I don't see myself steering too far away from the human body and creating a different perspective for viewers to see. I just really, really enjoy, not only for myself, the structures that when you break down the human body, how really beautifully pleasing, like aesthetically pleasing they can be, and I kind of want the rest of the viewers that come across my artwork to have a similar perspective. I think a lot of people, when they see human anatomy, they see a skull, they see anything, they view it to be grotesque. And I don't want that to be the view, because I think the human body, whether you strip it down to a certain layer or not, it should be beautiful no matter who you are, whatever, like religion, culture, gender, anything like that. It's just applicable to everyone, and that needs to be shared and shown.
We've reached the end of this tour off 90. Thanks for riding along. See you next time. But before we go, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz hosted his first Governor's Pheasant Opener last fall in Austin. Here's what happened during that hunt.
Minnesota isn't just all woods and water. This gives us a chance to show off southern Minnesota, the prairies, the agricultural lands, the rural communities, the countryside, the beauty of southern Minnesota that we get a chance to talk to so many people about.
It is such a pleasure to come here. This is a city that does everything world class. This is a city that continues to defy expectations of what a rural community can and will do. From the welcoming atmosphere to the organization to the centerpieces to how awesome is it that the podium is a shotgun shell. I'm like, yay. So it only took me a while to figure that out, and I was so happy.
I am so excited to be here with all of you for our first, as Governor and Lieutenant Governor, for our first Pheasant Opener. And every time I come to southern Minnesota, I feel so embraced and so welcome. And this trip has been no different.
I can't imagine any place I would rather be than in Austin, Minnesota, with folks who care deeply about our heritage, our hunting heritage, our conservation heritage, our family heritage, and to spend this time for me with friends is just an incredible privilege.
There's a
lot of public land in Minnesota. We're hunting just on private land today, but there's a lot of good pheasant hunting around you, so wherever you're at is the best place to hunt.
I'm really happy this is in Austin. I think this is a great community event, and I think the people that have volunteered their time, they've been doing a great job.
Oh, everybody wants to get a bird, but it is the truth of it. It's not a cliche. There's no bad day hunting. There's friends, there's families, there's the bountiful outdoors, and I just think getting out and seeing that. And it's really interesting to me is it's a little cold early. This group doesn't really care.
Just really looking forward to the hunt. The weather might be a little windy, but I think we'll get some birds and it'll be a good event.
I just really want to thank the Austin community here. They've been wonderful and gracious hosts. The events yesterday with the banquet, the breakfast here this morning, all the hunters, the Sea of Orange, it's just very high energy, very positive. I know everybody's looking forward to getting outside today, hopefully finding some birds, but experiencing all that this area has to offer.
Funding for Off 90 is provided in part by the Minnesota Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.